What would happen if the team itself didn't understand how one of its drivers achieved a perfect lap? What if that performance, unexpected and almost illegal for the physics of your car, came from Oscar Piastri? At Qatar 2025, McLaren not only saw its young star shine, but engineers had to re-evaluate everything they thought they knew about the MCL39. It all started like any other Grand Prix weekend. Qatar, with its lights shining on the asphalt of Lusail, did not seem to be preparing anything out of the ordinary. McLaren arrived with high but contained expectations. The British team was confident in its overall performance, based on a solid structure developed since the middle of last season, but knew that Qatar would be a particular challenge. The Lusail circuit is fast, fluid, with long corners that demand stability and precision, a layout where Lando Norris has historically stood out for his measured aggressiveness and his talent at high speeds. From the first minutes of free practice, something caught our attention. Oscar Piastri, usually more discreet in the initial sessions, began to set competitive times with an ease that did not fit with previous simulation records. Its lap of 1 minute and 20.924 seconds, just 58 thousandths faster than Norris, did not seem alarming, until engineers began to take a closer look at how it had been built. In each microsector, Piastri showed an efficiency that bordered on the unusual. It traced cleanly, but without the usual steering wheel correction that is usually seen even on fast laps. Its management was surgical, without errors, without visible corrections. Still, at the time, it was thought to be simply a good start. Nothing else. But then came the sprint qualifying. That's where the balance was broken. Piastri wasn't just fast, it was dominant. He stopped the clock at 1 minute and 20.055 seconds and placed himself ahead of George Russell, leaving Norris not close, but at a distance of 230 thousandths. That gap is abysmal when we talk about two drivers with the same car, in similar conditions, and who tend to be separated by just hundredths of a second in most sessions. McLaren's surprise was not emotional, it was technical. When looking at the telemetry data, the engineers did not understand what they were seeing. Piastri's performance did not match any pre-existing patterns in his models. The team's internal prediction tools, based on thousands of simulations, did not contemplate that level of speed could be achieved in those conditions and with that aerodynamic package. It was as if Piastri's car had operated in a new technical dimension, a dimension unknown even to those who designed it. In the corridors of the paddock, rumors began to circulate. Had McLaren inadvertently found something in its setup? Was Piastri simply the one for this type of layout? The faces of the team's engineers were a poem, technically stumped. No one inside the garage could explain with certainty how Piastri had achieved that execution. The return was perfect, yes. But what was really worrying was the how more than the how much. The data began to reveal an uncomfortable truth. McLaren didn't fully understand the limits of its own car. And that is as terrifying as it is promising. Oscar Piastri's performance not only changed the order of the grid, it changed the internal perception of what the MCL39 was capable of. And in modern Formula One, where everything is modeled, simulated and predicted in advance, finding something you didn't know existed is a silent revolution. The real tremor at McLaren did not come with the checkered flag, but on the garage monitors. When engineers downloaded telemetry from Oscar Piastri's qualifying lap, the technical room froze. What they saw had no immediate explanation within the parameters they had modeled for weeks. Every team in Formula One relies on an intricate web of simulations, predictive models and artificial intelligence tools that determine what a car can and cannot do. But here, Piastri had just proven the theory wrong. The most revealing sector was the third, an area made up of high-speed corners where downforce and driver commitment are vital. In this section, Piastri was not only faster than Norris, but he did so with a technique that seemed to rewrite the internal laws of the MCL39. The Australian kept the accelerator full in areas where he was supposed to lift slightly. Not for bravery, not because of madness, but because, in his case, the car allowed it. The engineers dug even deeper. The comparative analysis of curves T4, T5 and the technical sequence T12, T13, T14 showed that Piastri maintained minimum speeds between 8 and 12 km per hour higher than those of his teammate. That alone is an anomaly. But even more so was the observation that this rhythm did not cause greater wear and tear. In fact, the sensors indicated a lower thermal increase in the rear tires, less load on the brakes and a more contained temperature fluctuation. It was as if the car, under Piastri's command, operated within a new zone of aerodynamic efficiency that not even the team simulators had been able to identify. One of the most intriguing clues was found in the behavior of the differential. While Norris had opted for a more stable delivery map, Piastri chose a mode that, on paper, should generate understeer at corner entry. But in practice, that aggressive differential not only did not penalize it, but it allowed a livelier entry, a more controlled turn and output traction that kept the tires in an ideal thermal window. The figures were clear, but their interpretation broke with what was known. In turn 14, for example, Piastri was flat on the accelerator. I didn't lift. Meanwhile, Norris had to pace lightly to maintain stability. Even so, the sensors showed that the lateral loads on the Australian's car were 15% higher, but without the thermal excess that would be expected in those conditions. The dynamic balance was simply perfect. Then came the setup review. Piastri had reduced the front wing's angle of attack by 1.2 degrees. In addition, the rear suspension had been lowered by 3 millimeters. These modifications, considered by some within the team as excessively risky, proved to be the key to their advantage. Technically, a lower rear suspension reduces error tolerance, but it can also optimize aerodynamic flow in high-load zones if executed precisely. What Piastri did was exactly that: find a technical foothold on an edge so thin that, until then, seemed impractical. All of this led to a fundamental question within the team. To what extent have they underestimated the real capabilities of the MCL39? Because if a driver can, with minor adjustments and surgical execution, achieve a lap that the team's own simulator didn't contemplate, then the car's limits are ill-defined, or at least incomplete. And that changes everything. It changes how it is developed, how it is configured, and, above all, how the relationship between pilot and machine is defined. Oscar Piastri's return in Qatar is no longer a bright spot on the timesheet. He became a scientific anomaly inside the McLaren garage. And in Formula One, when science is forced to remain silent in the face of a perfect lap, you know that you are facing something much bigger than a simple successful classification. The reaction within McLaren was not one of immediate celebration. It was technical confusion. Oscar Piastri's performance could not be explained with the team's conventional tools. An extraordinary technical meeting was immediately called after the sprint classification. It was not common. It wasn't routine. But what they had just witnessed forced the team to rethink their own bases of operation. Andrea Stella, team manager, was one of the first to react firmly. For him, what happened was not a simple flash of individual talent, but a symptom that the team had to re-evaluate the correlations between the track, the wind tunnel, and the digital simulations. The misalignment between what the simulator projected and what Piastri managed to execute on the track became, in Stella's words, a crack in the prediction model that could not be ignored. This also affected the internal dynamics between pilots. Lando Norris, who until then had been the team's technical and strategic reference, faced for the first time a scenario where his teammate was not only faster, but also seemed to have interpreted the car in a more profound way. In the past, the differences between the two were marginal, but in Qatar they were substantial. And the most disturbing thing for Norris was that Piastri had not achieved it by being more aggressive or more reckless, but by having a better understanding of how the car could behave if taken out of its comfort zone. This forced the team to also review their decision-making procedures between sessions. Were they prioritizing Norris' approach too much? Had they assumed that their setup preferences were optimal for both drivers? Qatar revealed that a pilot can discover new windows of performance if given the freedom to experiment, even at the cost of breaking conservative simulation and preparation standards. On a technical level, this led to a revision of the MCL39 base settings map. The differential working ranges, dynamic heights on straight and curves, balance tolerances in high lateral load curves, and thermal tire management strategies were restudied. A new line of internal research was opened focused exclusively on understanding how Piastri's configuration managed to combine aerodynamic efficiency with low mechanical wear. Some even began to talk, without official confirmation, of redesigning parts of the team's predictive software. All of this led to one inescapable conclusion. McLaren had not only underestimated the car's potential. He had underestimated the scope of what a driver like Oscar Piastri could do if given the right tools and the confidence to break out of the mold. The Australian had not only been fast. He had shown that there were still secrets to discover in the car that, supposedly, was already at the maximum of its development for that stage of the championship. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.